Hunter by the Prowler. The Sasquatch phenomenon has been dying down recently, it seems. At least that's what people tell me. They say it's just a hoax. If they were real, then why haven't we seen one by now? Come across a body in the woods or something. Well, friends, what happened to me just a month ago would shake the shit out of your hole, slide down your leg, and rest at your feet in a pool of terror. I've been a hunter for over 30 years, you see. These woods don't contain nothing I haven't seen, or so I thought. It happened on Saturday the 14th, like I said, a month back. I loaded up my truck with my essentials and my dog Roscoe, and we headed up to the mountains. A very particular spot, as a matter of fact. A place I've been going to since I was in short pants. I'm telling you, friends, this was the best spot to hunt in all of Washington State. This was like my second home. My peepaw taught me everything I knew, right at this very spot. And I've never seen anything strange in all my days of coming out here. After about an hour in the truck, I arrived at my site. It was just as beautiful as I remembered, but for some reason, I don't know why, seemed off. There was a strangeness in the air. I feel stupid thinking back on it now. I should have known something wasn't right about the woods that day. It's quiet, too damn quiet. And my boy Roscoe wouldn't even get out of the damn truck. He just laid there whimpering up against the passenger door. He's never done that before. Roscoe was the best hunting dog I've ever had. I should have been paying attention, damn it. He knew. He could smell it in the air, I know it. But sadly, my dumbass wasn't paying attention. So I got some food out, and I got Roscoe to come out of the truck. Then I set up the tent, collected some wood for fire later on, and got the rest of my supplies out of the truck. The sun was still out, so I wanted to get some hunting in right away. I grabbed my rifle, and me and Roscoe started out. Now, like I said, up till this point I hadn't noticed shit, but I finally went on the alert when I saw scratch marks on a few of the trees leading away from my campsite. It looked like bear marks to me, so my guard was definitely up at this point. We continued into the forest when we finally happened upon a deer drinking in the stream. I raised my rifle, one to the head, and it fell over dead. I sent old Roscoe to go and secure the body, but to my surprise he just stopped, halfway to the carcass, and he just sat there. I ran over and looked down at him, and he was sniffing, just sniffing the lightly blowing breeze. Right when I was about to say, "What are you smelling, boy?" it hit me. It was the most putrid thing that's ever hit my nostrils in my entire life. It was a combination of shit, rotten eggs, and a homeless old woman that's been lying dead for 2 weeks before someone's found her. I got sick right on the spot. But in the middle of me blowing chunks, I heard Roscoe start to growl. I looked up, and coming towards the deer's body was one of the biggest damn bears I've ever seen. It bent down and sank its teeth in its hind leg. I crouched down to pick up my rifle, but when I did, I heard a loud snap. Damn it, I stepped on a twig, I thought. I slowly looked back up towards the bear, and it was now staring right back at me. It started towards me and Roscoe, but right when it was about to take off at full speed towards us, the loudest roar I've ever heard in my whole life came from the bushes just to the left of the bear. I swear to God, it was so loud it swayed the trees. I could feel it vibrate my boots. I stopped and looked towards the bushes, The bear stopped and looked towards the bushes, and I shit you not, what emerged was a 7-foot tall, hairy as hell, ape-like creature. Everything that's ever been described was looking right at me and the bear. It was a damn Sasquatch. No ifs, ands, or buts. I was looking at the legendary creature. I stood in amazement as the Sasquatch leapt from the bushes and tore the bear's jaw clean off its head and started to eat it. Just then I heard Roscoe start to growl, and that lifted me out of my trance. All at once it hit me. The putrid smell, the bear, the damn Sasquatch. I just stared at the woodland beast eating its prey. But now its head started to rise, and it slowly looked into my eyes, sniffing in my direction. I could hear it growl in the distance. Just then Roscoe barked. I snapped back into reality. I told Roscoe to follow, turned and ran back towards the truck. I heard splashing from behind me as it crossed the stream. I ran and ran as fast as I could, but it followed. The whole forest shook as it ran after me. Thankfully, I was well enough ahead and lost him in the bushes. Got in the truck, and me and Roscoe got the hell out of there. Haven't been back since. Gee, mister, that's a real spooky story and all. But we know you're just trying to scare us. You just don't want us going up the mountain and partying in your woods. Please, kids, this ain't no joke. Turn this car around and go to one of those more crowded, family-oriented camping sites. I'm begging you. Thanks, mister, for your concern. But we're not kids. We'll be fine. You take care now. Bye. That was 2 weeks ago, and those dumb-ass kids are still missing. I warned them, didn't I, Roscoe? They're not gonna find 'em. Hell, there's probably nothing left. Damn it, nobody believes me. Why doesn't anybody believe me? Alaska Monster? Bigfoot? Okay, so I know what you were thinking, and I'm actually not a true believer of Bigfoot or whatever this was. But this man claims that what he saw was true, and he will never be able to get what happened out of his mind. Here is what he told me. So he was an older fellow who loved spending his time in rural Alaska. I'm not talking a couple hundred people, but completely by himself in his cabin in the woods. So during the winter, he was out by himself as usual, about 10 miles from the nearest village, and he had just got done with his chores and whatnot. He was settling down and had just stoked the fire for the night. So he decided to go to bed. So he did. About 1 or 2 a.m., he suddenly woke up and got the feeling like he was being watched by something. He was pretty shook up by it and eventually got back to sleep. This is where it got kind of weird. When he woke up the next morning, he looked out his 2-story window. Remember, cabin floors may be shorter than normal buildings. And to his surprise, there were frozen marks on the window of what looked to be hands and a nose pressed on the window, as if someone was cupping their hands around their eyes, trying to look into the window. This obviously could not have been a person, as he was alone, and it was more than 1 story off the ground. He was pretty freaked out by it, and went outside to look for some tracks, or anything, but he found nothing. No tracks, no trails leading anywhere into the woods. This man was not crazy or a drunk. He was well known in the village, and he was really a nice guy. The story is a little hard to believe, but it is what he said happened. It gives me the creeps just thinking about it, being alone in the middle of nowhere and having something try looking in your window in the middle of the night? Speaking of sounds in the woods, wow, this story brought back some crazy memories of my years living in Arkansas. I lived way out in Madison County, about 7 miles from the nearest paved road. We had coyotes, black bear, panther, and all kinds of things wandering about. It wasn't scary exactly. Hair-raising at times, like the first time you step outside to get the mail and there's a bear eating out of your trash can. Or when I go to my favorite spot by the river and there are panther tracks all over the place. I was very familiar with the sounds these animals made, many of which would scare the pants off any person not expecting them, as anyone who has lived in the wild can attest. Well, turns out I had one more sound left to hear. It was the only moment of my life in which I got to experience real, primal fear. One night I was returning from work, and it was dark. I blew a tire, which happened constantly on those flint gravel roads. I was prepared with a flashlight as usual, but there wasn't much of a moon and no streetlights or houses. Just me on a dirt road with a wall of forest on one side and a gully behind me. There I was, a tire in my hand, and therefore not on my car, and my light on my wheel, and therefore black everywhere else. When from behind me, down in the gully, came a sound I will never forget. At first, it sounded like a female opera star with an impressive set of lungs, wailing because she just found her whole family murdered. It was the blood-curdling scream of blood-curdling screams. It was very human, very close, and ear-splittingly loud. I nearly soiled myself, and I don't say that lightly. The sound changed then, and any possibility that I was listening to an actual wailing opera singer left my mind. It was no longer human. It was, I don't know. It wasn't something I ever expected to hear in the continental United States. A rainforest in Papua New Guinea, maybe, but not Arkansas. You have never seen anyone change a tire so fast in your life. I didn't even bother to put the busted tire in the trunk. As soon as my vehicle was functional, I jumped in and hauled ass. This is the closest I've ever heard, resembling the latter part of the sound I heard. That audio attributes the sound to a Bigfoot. I don't know about that. Bigfoot never crossed my mind at the time, as the only thing I was thinking was I'm gonna die. I am going to die. I'm gonna die. The Crooked Woman. It all started 4 days ago. I live in a small country town in the southern part of Alabama, and we have a population of roughly 300 people. My house is right beside a small highway that might see 40 to 50 cars a day. It was about 9:30 at night, and I was taking the garbage out to the can, like I have done many times before. It's important to know that our closest neighbor is roughly 10 miles away, and the only thing around my house is woods in every direction. I had just thrown the bag into the can, and I was headed back towards the house. As I turned, I heard this unfamiliar, almost tapping sound behind me. I quickly looked back and turned on the flashlight on my phone to see what it was. At this point, my dog, who is usually very quiet, was growling in a way I'd never heard before from him. I figured it was most likely a deer or some other animal, as it's quite common to see a variety of animals where I live. What my phone's flashlight revealed was something I will never be able to forget. I saw what I believed to be a woman about 6 feet from me. I think it's important to note that I'm a 6'4", 250-pound guy that isn't the easiest person to scare. What I saw was not normal. This woman, who looked a solid 2 feet taller than me, was walking almost robotically. It was as if her back was broken and her torso was behind her hips. She was unnaturally pale, and she was taking the most massive, painful strides I have ever seen in my life. Without stopping, she immediately turned to me, and I saw her face. It was long, scarred up, and she had sunken in, beady eyes. When she saw me, she let out a noise that I can best describe as a grunt. And she picked up speed. This is a point where you might think I stood my ground and protected my house, or my dog jumped out and attacked her. But no, I screamed like a 6-year-old girl and sprinted back into my house and locked all of the doors. My dog barked all night, and at 1:33 a.m., there was a single loud knock on my window. I woke up and found that all 4 of my tires were slashed, and my front door was unlocked. The next night, at the same time, I heard a single knock at the same window. My dog has been missing since the 2nd day, and last night I heard 2 knocks at the window. The cops say they won't come back for a knock when it's 20 minutes one way for them. I've been having nightmares about her every night, and I am still trying to figure out what I should do next. I will not go outside past dark. I'm gonna do some research to try and find out what this could be. I will update if something else happens. Whatever you do, don't run. Okay, I'm going to start this out by saying that I am a relatively normal girl. Yes, I believe in the supernatural and the possibility of things like ghosts and monsters, and I love the X-Files, probably more than most. But I rarely tell this story for fear of sounding crazy, and I am still skeptical about what I saw, about what it was. Growing up, my family had a proud tradition of redneck Thanksgiving. We, my Uncle Rob's family, and my Aunt Carol's family, would rent a double-wide trailer at Lake Nacimiento for 2 weeks, build a beer tree, cook little weenies over bonfires, and fashion a great centerpiece out of beer cans, pine cones, and anything else we could find. It was great. The lake and weather were usually too cold for most people near the end of November, and the year I turned 11, the weather was so chilly that the campground behind the rental trailers was completely empty. There had been one large group near the last set of bathrooms, pretty far away from us on the edge of the forest, but they had left halfway through our trip, so we had the place to ourselves. As part of the tradition, the kids, 6 of us, had to take turns going out in pairs and collecting burnable things for that night's bonfire. This particular night it was my sister, Kara, 17, and my turn. We had to venture farther than usual, as it was the second to last night, and we had picked almost every site clean. Remembering the large group that had left, we headed to the campsite across from the last bathrooms, in hopes of something more substantial than the handful of pine cones and twigs that we had already scrounged. We cut through the different campgrounds and ended up at the bottom of the hill where the restrooms were. This is where things got weird. My sister saw it before I did and stopped walking so abruptly that I bumped into her, almost dropping my pine cones. I started to protest, but she cut me off, shushing me and pointing towards the bathrooms. Just over the crest of the hill, about 40 to 50 feet away, in the glow of the street lamp, we saw the silhouette of a large trash can and what, as I initially thought, was an even larger bear doubled over it. The bear, after giving my brain a few seconds to process, stopped looking so much like a bear. This immense, hairy, humanoid creature was holding the trash can with one hand. I could make out its fingers against the dark blue can, while shoveling something into its mouth with the other. It was grunting and chewing loudly, almost comically. I would have laughed at the snuffling and clear mouth breathing if I hadn't been so terrified. My sister squeaked as she let out a breath that she had been holding. The creature immediately stopped shoveling. The light from behind was bright enough that I couldn't make out the thing's face as its head turned slowly in our direction, food dropping from what I imagined was its chin. I got a better idea of how large it really was as it straightened into an upright position. The arm that had been shoveling food fell to its side. The trash can that came all the way up to my chest was just barely at its hip level, and the silhouette of it looked almost blurry because of the hair that stuck out all over its body. "Kara," I whispered to my sister, unsure of what to do. "Whatever you do, don't run," she responded, eyes focused straight ahead. It felt like ages that we were frozen in a staring contest with something that's eyes we couldn't see, neither of us knowing what to do. Then the creature shifted, but only slightly. He took only a half step in our direction, but with that minimal gesture, the spell was broken. My sister, entering flight or fight mode, ignored her advice to me, threw her pine cones to the ground and ran. I hesitated, momentarily shocked by the sudden noise and abandonment, before dropping my own brush and sprinting after her. Neither of us looked back. We returned to the trailers, out of breath and panicking. When we had calmed down enough to speak, we told everyone about the bear, man, thing we had seen. We refused to go with them to look for it. We even refused to come out of the trailer until the next morning. When they got back, they said they found our pine cones and a knocked-over trash can, but saw nothing else there. They chalked it up to raccoons and overactive imaginations. They still don't believe us to this day, and we can't go camping without being taunted about how we once saw Bigfoot. My sister and I agree on very little, but she still agrees with my account of that night, and even jokes about how she left me as an appetizer for Bigfoot. For the record, I have never called it Bigfoot, and I don't claim to know what it was I saw. I do know that it was something I'd never seen before, and will be happy to never see again. I no longer go hunting by myself. I do not know what I saw, but I do know it was something that should not have been there, and it will remain with me the rest of my life. I was turkey hunting one morning, approximately 4 years ago. I have never told my story due to I feel people will not believe me. It rained all night long that night, and thus it allowed me to walk into the forest in complete silence, no leaves crackling. I set up on a hill overlooking a small creek and valley. It was nearly pitch black due to the overcast sky, but soon the rain stopped and the forest became brighter. Soon after, I realized I was sitting within 15 feet of several birds that were roosted in a tree next to me. I didn't know they were there until they started shaking the rain off. My gun was already propped on my knee and pointed at my decoy. As things became brighter, I could make out most of the valley floor, and I continued to watch the birds roosted next to me. Soon after, one of the birds gobbled. I began hearing something off in the distance, almost immediately after. I only remember this because it was a very strange paced sound. The rhythm of it seemed odd. Nothing I could think of would make a sound like this. I could see down the valley to my right for a fairly long distance. However, to my left, a separate hillside came out, and I could not see up the valley in that direction. The noise continued with almost near perfect rhythm for several minutes, with only occasional breaks. It continued to get louder. I soon realized the sound I was hearing was coming from up the valley in the direction I could not see. The turkeys in their roost next to me stopped gobbling and remained silent. A few moments later, the forest was becoming fairly bright, and I could see most everything around me. All of the birds roosted in the tree flew down and hit the forest floor running. They didn't even seem to notice the decoy. I remained perfectly still, watching the birds run through the forest, down to my right through the valley. They acted as though something spooked them. At first I thought maybe it was me that spooked them, but then it occurred to me the sound had stopped about the same time the birds took off. As soon as the birds were out of sight, the noise began again. I remained still, leaning against a large ash tree. Maybe 1 minute after I lost sight of the birds, the sound was becoming much louder and apparent of what it might be. My first instinct was that another hunter was walking through the forest. However, to this day, I will never forget what I saw in the coming moments. The sound with an almost steady rhythm reminded me of what it would sound like if I were walking on dry leaves in the forest. There was not a drop of wind on this morning, and I believe the valley might have been echoing the sound. A few moments later, I caught sight of it, maybe 50 yards to my left, coming into view on the bottom edge of the valley. At first, I thought it was a hunter in a ghillie suit, but upon closer examination, I realized this was no human wearing a camo outfit. It continued to walk upright on 2 feet down the valley towards my right. When the creature got to the bottom of the hill outcropping I was sitting on, it stopped dead in its tracks and remained perfectly still momentarily. I think it was at this point I truly realized what I was seeing. When it stopped and stood still, it became nearly invisible in the forest. It seemed an eternity passed while I sat against this tree, uncontrollably shaking. I was scared out of my wits, even with a 10-gauge shotgun propped on my knee, pointed in the direction of the creature. What happened next scared me so bad I would have bet my life that I was going to have a heart attack. The creature turned its head and looked directly at me. I stared directly into the eyes of this creature for an unknown amount of time. It made no sound. It did not move, only stared at me. I was in full camouflage, including a face mask, so maybe it was not sure what I was. Shaking so bad at this point, the only thing I could think of was to defend myself. I clicked the safety off of the shotgun. When I did this, the creature went into an almost crouching position, only it seemed more like it was in a position that would allow it to move quickly. The stare down went on for what seemed forever. I readied my shotgun, not afraid to move anymore, since it was apparent I had been seen. When I positioned my left hand under the forearm of my shotgun, the creature sprang up, nearly causing me to pull the trigger. It continued to walk through the forest, with its head turned, watching me. I continued pointing my gun at it. I never pulled the trigger. I was so afraid I didn't know what to do. Eventually, I lost sight of it. I jumped up as soon as it was gone, and I ran back to my truck without stopping to rest once. To this day, I will never forget what I saw, or the feeling of absolute terror that overcame me. I do not want to be famous, nor do I want my story posted all over the internet. I just thought I should tell somebody my story. Everything I have just read is entirely true. Stories from the Backwoods, Late Night Hunter. Before I get started, I want you all to know that I live in a somewhat isolated area of Wisconsin, surrounded by forest and farmland. This first story happened about 7 months ago. It was midsummer, and I was driving home from my girlfriend's house. It was around 11 at night, and I was driving down a back road, as I often do, because I can go faster without the worry of the occasional cop driving past. Anyhow, I was driving down the road, doing about 65 or 70 miles an hour, when I came to an area with an open field on the right and dense forest on the left. Between the moon and the stars, I could see the field pretty well. I saw 2 figures moving in the field, running towards the road. Deer aren't uncommon out here, so I thought nothing of it. Normally, a quick honk or two will scare the deer into running the opposite direction, but this time it didn't. The first figure bolts across the road. A deer, just like I thought. The second figure stops and cuts back in the opposite direction. The problem was that this one was different. It was much bigger than a deer, and it seemed to run different. I slammed on the brakes and hopped out of my truck. Looking back now, I don't know why I did that. Logically, it didn't make sense. I walked around to the passenger side of the truck, hoping to see something moving in the field. No luck. That's when I heard it. To this day, I still can't find the words to describe it properly. It sounded like an animal in pain. A piercing sound that made my blood run cold. I froze. Even in my head, I remember saying, "Get back in the truck. Get out of here." But I couldn't move. I heard the cry one more time. It cut off abruptly. I slowly stepped backwards, not wanting to turn my back on the field. I got back in the truck and locked all the doors. I sat there for a moment, trying to control my breathing. I put the truck in drive and kept going, convinced that what I heard was just some trick of the night, and the adrenaline pumping through my veins. As I pulled away, I looked back in the rearview mirror. Maybe it was the fear, but I will swear to this day that I saw something walk out of the woods, onto the road, and watch as I drove away. Even today, I can't drive down that stretch of road without feeling like I'm being watched from the woods. Anyone who has felt that way knows what I mean. That knot in your stomach, the feeling of wanting to run as fast as you can, yet not being able to move. The cold that penetrates every part of your body. Bigfoot. Story about the Oregon wilderness, as was told by Jim, my aunt's friend, avid hiker and hunter. I don't remember much of the details. His stories all had basically one particular conclusion: presence of something intelligent in surrounding wilderness. Jim used to hike, just like my grandpa, with one little exception, that my grandpa was a professional backpacker back in the USSR, which is going to be of some significance later, and he traveled with a group and some firearms. Jim used to go all alone in the wilderness, with a firearm as well. Jim's encounters have never ended in a particular meeting with an entity, but usually in a form of traces, broken branches, distant howling and roaring, and a feeling that he was being watched, which he actually dismissed as his natural instinctive reaction to unfamiliar environment and vast possibilities. Bears, wolves, moose, all could be around. Except for one such encounter. I don't remember what area he was telling me exactly about, but I'm pretty sure it was one of those Rogue River forests in Oregon. So as usual, he left his car at the parking lot and continued afoot. I think he planned for 3 days, but I'm not sure. Anyway, closer to dusk, Jim found a place for him to stop. He prepared his dinner using a portable stove, got into his tent and sleeping bag. He then fell asleep. He couldn't recall when it happened, but it was already dark outside, except for the moon shining over the nearby top. But Jim didn't know that yet. Jim woke up to loud banging noises that appeared to be wood on wood knocking, but it was so loud he couldn't hear his own commotion as he was pulling the sleeping bag, forcing himself out of it, then pulling the rifle and sending a round into the chamber. He called out once, twice. At that point, he was frightened. The banging never stopped. He poked his rifle out of the tent and squeezed the trigger. Flash illuminated the outside of the tent. The bang followed, and then silence. From what I remember, it was kind of a deafening silence for him. Blood was pulsing in his ears. He was blushing and almost had vertigo. He also was startled by his own rifle, as everything happened so quick. He never adapted to the situation. It was silent for not long, but for him, it was almost forever. Did I just kill someone? Roaring and the sounds of breaking branches not far away. He was so scared and confused. He was contemplating whether he should stay inside and wait with the rifle, or go outside and pursue the intruder. Jim forced himself out of the tent, screaming, "You motherfucker! Leave me alone! I'll shoot you!" There was nothing outside. His eyes just started to get used to the darkness, and within a minute he noticed that a spruce not far away from him, maybe in a distance of a clear shot, started to swing from one side to another, like there was something on top of it, forcing the tree to break down. It was like that for quite some time, and then it stopped. Jim decided to get inside and wait for sunrise, which he did. And then he quickly grabbed everything he had and made it all the way back to the parking lot as fast as he could, and never stopped for longer than enough to catch his breath. As for Grandpa, he was much younger at the time he was hiking and kayaking back to civilization with his group. They spent weeks in wilderness, occasionally encountering foresters' cabins or entire villages of the local population. They would usually trade something for food, usually alcohol, which was the most valuable, and they would direct them not to go into certain areas deemed cursed or sacred. They would only smirk and do whatever they wanted. But even then, they would encounter some weird shit. I was amazed just how similar Jim's story was to one of my grandpa's stories. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.